All right, ladies and gentlemen of Virginia Peninsula, welcome back. Your 12-week class today is your lecture on the High Middle Ages. I can't think of any notes I have for you other than I hope all is going well in your neck of the woods. So let us dive in. Yeah, I just no, let's just dive in and go for it. So share. I've just been having one headache after another with Zoom, and I think not no so much for your school, but for one of the other school I have in California, and it was a mess yesterday. So we are talking about the Middle Ages now, and we break up the Middle Ages into two parts. This first part is called the early or the high Middle Ages, and it runs from 1000 to 1300. Next week, we'll be covering what they call the late Middle Ages. Uh, that'll cover from 1300 to 1500, which serves as a segue into the Italian Renaissance. And the Renaissance and the last part of the Middle Ages sort of share that century between 1400 and 1500. There's like the transition period um, when the Middle Ages ends. I'm sure there's no time clock. It's just that renewal of philosophy and the renewal of art and other aspects sort of bring people out of what they call the Dark Ages, even though people during the Dark Ages didn't see themselves in the Dark Ages. Um, and we're also in that 14th century, we're dealing with the Black Plague that was very devastating, the first wave. So we'll cover that tomorrow. But this first one, and it's starting at 1000 for 1300. We're already 200 years past the time when Charlemagne has been crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope. So this is kind of a short period here, and it won't be that long of a PowerPoint. One political and economic aspect of this time period is what they call feudalism. If you see, this is the social structure under feudalism in Europe, the Western world. You may recall the one I showed you under Egypt with the pharaoh at the top. And here we have another one where the king or the queen sit at the top, and beneath them are those who are given lands. They call them fiefs, Fief, and peasants. These fiefs and peasants are given to lords, the lords become the vassals to the king, and in turn, the vassals swear loyalty and military aid to the king. And below the vassals become the army itself that provide that military aid. Those are the knights. And the knights become vassals to the lords. And in exchange for food, protection, and shelter, the knights provide homage to the lords above them and the king, and they provide military service. And then, as always, the poor peasants are at the bottom. And I know what that feels like. Years ago, I had jobs where that would have been considered peasant work. The peasants are actually represent the largest block of the population, which is true most of the time. They are given food, protection, and shelter, and in exchange, they farm the land, and I guess they pay rent as well. But they're actually the backbone of everything because they're providing the sustenance and everything for the people above them. And this, even though this looks like it's a vertical relationship, it's not always. There was a time when the King of England inherited lands in France, and so the King of England became the vassal to the King of France. So I have a video on that. Let's take a look at feudalism. But please let me make sure that I did this because I sometimes forget. Okay.
Feudalism is a term that came into use in the 19th century to describe how society was structured during the High Middle Ages, that's between 1000 and 1300 AD. Earlier historians modelled a feudal system based on the exchange of land and services. Under this feudal system, most land in the kingdom belonged to the king, and some to the church. The king parcelled out large estates to great lords known as tenants-in-chief, in exchange for their military and political support. These great lords then parcelled out smaller portions of land to lesser lords on similar terms, who did the same to local lords, who did the same to peasants. The system is often represented as a pyramid with the king at the top. The feudal system had its own vocabulary. A king or lord who gave land to a lesser lord became the latter's overlord. The person receiving the land became the vassal of the person who granted it, and the land itself was called a fief. These relationships could even cross national borders. After the Norman conquest, it was not uncommon for lords to hold lands in England and France, owing allegiance to both kings. Even the King of England was a vassal of the King of France for the territories he had inherited there. Although this model reflects some fundamental truths about how medieval political culture worked, historians now think it is too simplistic to explain what was really going on. For one thing, the pyramid implies that all ties of loyalty were vertical, and that everyone was dependent on someone higher up in the pyramid. In fact, this wasn't always the case. Many feudal relationships were horizontal, among equals. For another, the kinds of services given in return for land could be very varied. For peasants, this was labour service or rent, while for landowners, it was more like an alliance. Vassals were expected to support their overlords politically and militarily. By the later Middle Ages, though, feudalism had largely disappeared from Europe. This was the result of a number of factors. Firstly, medieval kings grew less reliant on their great lords to provide soldiers for their armies, turning instead to professional paid soldiers. This process had already started in the 12th century, and by around 1300, kings no longer expected to assemble armies based on obligations to provide military service. This weakened the bonds of feudal political culture. Secondly, the Black Death, which arrived in England in 1348, significantly reduced the population available to work the land. Those who were lucky enough to survive the epidemic had increased bargaining power and could increasingly choose where they worked and demand higher wages. This meant that the nobility gradually lost their control over the lower and middling ranks in society. Finally, the growing economic importance of towns, which typically sat outside the feudal system with their own charters, and trade, also contributed to the decline of feudalism, gradually reducing the power of the nobility and leading to the growth of prosperous middling urban classes. So, to recap, the great lords were less frequently expected to provide military service to the king, the peasants were increasingly able to live and work where they wanted, and money replaced manpower as the key agent of economic and political power. Whilst feudalism declined in England from the 14th century onwards, it was not formally abolished until the 10 Years' Abolition Act of 1660. In other European countries, the end of feudalism came much later. France abolished feudalism after the 1789 revolution, and Russian peasants had to wait until 1861 to be made free. Amazingly, the last remaining traces of feudalism in the British Isles made it into the 21st century, until finally abolished by the Scottish Parliament in June 2000, with the Abolition of Feudal Tenure Act, which took effect in November 2004.
Okay, so that kind of suggests that feudalism, carried itself into the 21st century. So it begs the question, could feudalism exist today? Probably not on the scale that it existed, in the Middle Ages, but not on a federal or state level. But I would imagine there are smaller municipalities or even private relationships out there in the world where feudalism, feudalism persists, or is just a convenient way to create a transaction with someone else. I bet it does in many smaller ways. But on a larger scale, I don't know. Maybe we should replace our current with feudalism. All right, so why am I showing you this? Oh, no, this one comes first. Sorry. In fact, I'm gonna this well, there's a mistake in here. Anyway, what I wanted to do is point out the difference between the types of architecture that existed during this early period of the Middle Ages as opposed to the latter period, which I'll go into more detail next week. Uh, but prior to cathedrals such as Notre Dame that I just slipped in there, there was that's Gothic style. There was a style known as Romanesque, and it was the walls were very thick. It was just the style because architects still hadn't found ways to build these massive cathedrals where they could insert large windows like you see on the right-hand side. So, because the walls had to be so thick for such a structure, windows and doorways tended to be smaller. This is the Romanesque style. What followed was an invention called the flying buttress, and I'll show that to you in a minute, that opened up the wall space. It provided for cathedrals that could rise and rise higher and higher to the heights of places of buildings such as Notre Dame, and also provided wall space for these massive windows that you see here. So I'll just give you a quick glimpse of Notre Dame. You see the flying buttresses off to the side there. Anyway, I'll talk more about this next week, but this was the transition in architecture. So then they had during this time period, you had King John signing the Magna Carta, which he never followed through on anyway, which um, it gave equal power to the lords in England to essentially form the parliament. The lords sort of represented, I think they were called nobles, but the nobles sort of represented the people in exchange for land as well. But John was not built for that. And even though he signed the Magna Carta, he never really kept to its premise. Yeah, this was a bad time for England during this time. So next we come up with uh, Dante Alighieri, who he probably wrote this in the 14th century, the 1300s, after this time period. But next week we're covering Chaucer, and I thought I didn't want to do both of them together, so I'm doing Dante now, and this is a very serious story about Dante's journey into the depths of hell and then purgatory and heaven or paradise. And for those of you who maybe have been exposed to the Catholic Church or members, as I was, my parents put I and my siblings through kindergarten through high school. We were taught severely about the pains and the anguish of hell and purgatory, which is a place we're taught most people go when they die to have their souls cleansed in a burning fire before they can ascend into heaven. So Dante covers this territory in this story of his. I'll let the narrator unfold the story here.
Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Inscribed above the gate of hell, these ominous words warn dark tidings for Dante as he begins his descent into Inferno. Yet despite the grim tone, this prophecy sets into motion what is perhaps the greatest love story ever told, an epic journey that encompasses both the human and the divine. But for Dante to reach benevolent salvation, he must first find his way through hell. This landscape of torture is the setting for Inferno, the first in a three-part narrative poem written by Dante Alighieri in the 14th century. Casting himself as the protagonist, Dante travels deeper and deeper into hell's abyss, witnessing obscene punishments distinct to each of its 9 realms. Beginning in limbo, he travels through the circles of lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, heresy, violence, and fraud, to the horrific 9th circle of treachery, where sinners are trapped under the watchful eyes of Satan himself. The following two parts, Purgatorio and Paradiso, continue Dante's journey as he scales the Mount of Purgatory and ascends the 9 celestial spheres of heaven. Written together over 10 years, these 3 sections comprise the Divine Comedy, an allegorical imagining of the soul's journey towards God. But Dante's Divine Comedy is more than just religious allegory. It's also a witty, scathing commentary on Italian politics. A soldier and statesman from Florence, Dante was staunchly faithful to God, but often critical of the Roman Catholic Church. He particularly disliked its rampant nepotism and practice of simony, the buying and selling of religious favors such as pardons from sin. Many groups took advantage of these corrupt customs, but few supported them as much as the Guelfi Neri, or Black Guelphs. This was a political and religious faction which sought to expand the Pope's political influence. Dante was a member of the Guelfi Bianchi, or White Guelphs, who believed Florence needed more freedom from Roman influence. As a public representative for the White Guelphs, Dante frequently spoke out against the Pope's power, until the Black Guelphs leveraged their position to exile him from Florence in 1302. But rather than silencing him, this lifelong exile led to Dante's greatest critique of all. Dishonored and with little hope of return, the author freely aired his grievances with the Church and Italian society. Writing the Divine Comedy in Italian rather than the traditional Latin of the educated elite, Dante ensured the widest possible audience for his biting political commentary. In the Inferno's circle of the wrathful, Dante eagerly witnesses sinners tear Black Guelph Filippo Argenti limb from limb. In the circle of fraud, Dante converses with a mysterious sinner burning in the circle's hottest flames. He learns that this is Pope Nicholas III, who tells Dante that his 2 successors will take his place when they die, all 3 guilty of simony and corruption. Despite the bleak and sometimes violent imagery in Inferno, the Divine Comedy is also a love story. Though Dante had an arranged marriage with the daughter of a powerful Florentine family, he had also been unrequitedly in love with another woman since he was 9 years old, Beatrice Portinari. Despite allegedly meeting just twice, she became Dante's lifelong muse, serving as the inspiration and subject for many of his works. In fact, it's Beatrice who launches his intrepid journey into the pits of hell and up the terraces of Mount Purgatory. Portrayed as a powerful heavenly figure, she leads Dante through Paradiso's concentric spheres of heaven until he is finally face to face with God. In the centuries since its publication, the Divine Comedy's themes of love, sin, and redemption have been embraced by numerous artists, from Auguste Rodin and Salvador Dali to Ezra Pound and Neil Gaiman. And the poet himself received his own belated earthly redemption in 2008, when the city of Florence finally revoked Dante's antiquated exile. Next, find out why you should read the Tolstoy classic.
So it's interesting. I am one who, if I were reading this, I would have a difficult time understanding it. I just don't. I don't connect with Middle Ages language. I have a friend, a woman I dated many years ago, who had her master's degree in this topic, Middle Ages literature, and so I would sort of pick on her or pick her brain, let's say, when I needed some advice on understanding more about Dante's Divine Comedy, even Shakespeare, and even though and like authors like Milton and Paradise Lost, she was a whiz at it. Anyway, again, because this kind of story leaves an impression on me, because when I was a child, we did not attend mass or church with our parents. Belonging to a Catholic school, I was required to attend mass with my class on Sundays. So I would attend mass, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, not with my folks, but with my class. And, throughout all those years up through eighth grade, The priest, there were times the priest did give us, deliver some horrific imaging in their sermons, trying to scare us into behaving. And it worked, it worked, because when he's talking about the 7 or 9 layers of hell and all the gnashing of teeth, and you're 7, 8 years old, that leaves a big impression on you. And so that's why this story has a connection for me. But I also love the fact that he was using this as an indictment against the officials of the Catholic Church, because he's doing this, several hundred years before it's done again by Martin Luther, who, because of the printing press, was much more successful in his grievance against the Catholic Church, and literally a new religion emerged from that grievance against the church. But maybe it started here with Dante. So I want to introduce you to Thomas Aquinas. When we talk about grievances against the church, he didn't have any overt grievances, but the reason I bring him up is that he was a Catholic monk, but he was also a prolific writer and a thinker and a philosopher. And in one of his essays called the Summa Theologica, he put forth the idea that faith and reason could exist side by side. What does that mean? It means in his time that was a huge deal. In our time, it's nothing. What he's saying is that a person can have rational thoughts about most aspects of life, but that a person can also have a faith in God. And I'm certainly simplifying it. It's more complex than that. But in our time, we take this for granted. It's nothing anymore for someone to understand the nuance of theoretical mathematics, or understand tides or earthquakes, and understand outer space and the depths of the ocean, and diseases and all kinds of things that require a rational or medical or a technological approach to understanding the concept of something. But in Thomas Aquinas, and yet that same person can go to church on Sunday and express faith, have a faith in a God and an afterlife. We don't question that at all. But in Thomas Aquinas' time, that was a huge deal. He was introducing the idea that someone could have faith, but could also think about the world more rationally, which was, we're going to find out that during the early part of the Renaissance, there was a revival of classical literature from ancient Greece. And this was long before, if you believe in Christ, this was long before Christ existed. So the philosophers of ancient Greece did try to look at the world in a more rational approach. And so there was a revival of that later on here after Thomas's time during the early part of the Renaissance. And he helped lay some of the foundation for that, with this idea that someone could have a rational approach to thinking about life, but also have a great faith. So that's Thomas Aquinas. In the video on feudalism, we understood the one layer about the knights who provided military service to the king. This under feudalism, there was a practice known as arranged marriages. We know about them today. I'm sure they exist someplace in the world. Even in this country, there may be privately arranged marriages. But in those days, during the Middle Ages, this was kind of a common practice for arranged marriages for economic and political reasons. And so often these arranged marriages resulted in loveless marriages, where the two people who were thrown together as children, when they were old enough, they got married, but they didn't really care for each other. And so what society allowed for was something called courtly love. Obviously, this is not a practice that was engaged in by peasants. It was mostly knights of the court and ladies of the court who, if they were in loveless marriage, society allowed them to fall in love with each other and do all the things that lovers would do, except share in intimacy. That was completely forbidden. They could write love poems. They could go on picnics, they could laugh, they could dance, they could send love messages back to one another. They could enjoy all of those emotional aspects of being in a loving relationship, except for the fulfillment of the marriage agreement for intimacy to produce children. And so, among other reasons, besides this one, the knights developed a code of chivalry. I suppose they did to, keep their loyalty to the king, and to provide a means for them, if they chose it, to abstain from any kind of intimacy with someone who was not his or her his wife or her husband. And so this code, the chivalric code, stressed among other things loyalty to the king, courage, personal honor, and defending those who cannot defend themselves. Some of the value words that the knights chose were honor, modesty, loyalty, civility, courage, honesty, generosity, faith in God, and compassion. So if a knight is living by this code, a knight is going to be very careful about how he handles a relationship with a lady of the court when she might be married to someone else and he's married to someone else. So that falls under this concept of courtly love, and I'll let the young lady explain what that is.
Courtly love in medieval romance. Courtly love was a system of romance practiced in the Middle Ages. Courtly love had nothing to do with marriage. Your spouse was the person you had sex with to bring children into the world. Courtly love was outside of marriage and did not involve any sexual contact. Your lover was the person with whom you talked, giggled, danced, and showered with your affection. Sexual acts with your lover were forbidden, but when has that stopped anyone? Why did courtly love exist? Many marriages in the Middle Ages were arranged, so love had nothing to do with them. Typically, they were formed for political or economic reasons. Courtly love allowed nobles to have romantic relationships in addition to marital relationships. Most often, courtly love involved a lady of the court and a knight. Courtly love was also closely related to chivalry, a code of honor that told knights how to behave. Knights were to be generous, brave, pious, and honest. Today, chivalry refers only to how men treat women, based on how the knights were supposed to treat the noble ladies. One of the most famous examples of courtly love is Lady Guinevere and Sir Lancelot of Arthurian legend. Medieval romances were stories of adventure, gallant love, chivalry, and heroism. These represented the social order and ideals of the Middle Ages. Tales of King Arthur, Merlin, and the Knights of the Round Table were very idealized, and not like the reality of medieval England at all. The real King Arthur was not of the Middle Ages. Little is actually known about him. He was a Briton named Artorius, who helped fight off the Anglo-Saxon invaders. Around 1135, a monk produced a history based on legends. The history became a basis for further legends of King Arthur and his court.
Okay, so that gives you a deeper insight into how courtly love operated. Now we're going to see what happened when individuals sort of broke through that wall that forbade intimate relationships. Although this is not a knight and a lady of the court, what we have here is the true story of Abelard and Heloise. Abelard was a teacher in his 30s, and Heloise was the niece. Maybe she was either 17 or in her 20s, who lived with her uncle. And Abelard convinced the uncle to let him become Heloise's teacher. Well, in the process, of course, they fell into a deep romantic relationship, with which this young lady will explain to you, and life became kind of bad for them. Um, but their legacy is that they would write these long, long, long love letters to each other that are still available to us today, and that's what's brought them down in history. And I'll just let the young lady explain their story and how we know them today.
The love story of Eloise and Abelard is one of the most famous and popular love stories of all time. And it's a good one, filled with passion, romance, secret affairs, self-sacrifices, and, well, you'll see. There's even a secret marriage, which is always fun. It is 12th century Paris, and Abelard, a famous French philosopher, moves into the house of Notre Dame's canon, Fulbert. Eloise, Fulbert's niece, is also living in this house with her uncle, and of course she is a young, beautiful maiden who's also one of the most educated women of her time. Abelard, taken with her beauty and intelligence, convinces Fulbert to allow him to become Eloise's tutor. Now you can already see where this is going. The two fall in love and have a passionate secret affair. They made love in the kitchen of the convent, in the boudoir of the girl's uncle. They were really just passionately in love, physically everywhere. They wrote hundreds of love letters, and not before long, Eloise was pregnant, of course. Now there's a couple of things impeding this couple's happily ever after. Eloise's age has been up for debate, but it's been estimated that she was anywhere between 17 and 27 years of age, while Abelard would have been in his late 30s, so that's about a 10 to 20 age year gap. He would lose his job because of this relationship. It's kind of an embarrassing thing for a man of his position. Plus, her uncle would not be happy. Seeing as it's pretty difficult to hide a baby bump, Eloise flees to Brittany, Abelard's place of birth, and she stayed with his sister until she gave birth to their baby boy, Astrolabe. When her uncle Fulbert found out, he wasn't too thrilled. In fact, he was furious that Abelard had ruined his niece. Abelard offered to marry Eloise, but Eloise refused, in part saying that marriage would impede his work. It would bring disgrace upon him. Eloise preferred to be his whore rather than his wife, preferring freedom over chains. But Abelard refused to give up, and eventually he convinced her to return to Paris, and they wed in secret. Fulbert, wanting to punish Abelard for ruining his reputation, decided to start spreading the news of their secret wedding, causing a little bit of a problem. Abelard sent Eloise out to the convent of Argenteuil for safety, or maybe, trying to recover his reputation for having a baby mama, but then denying it and having a secret marriage. Either one. Fulbert, however, believed that Abelard was trying to get rid of Eloise by turning her into a nun. Oh boy, this is where it gets a little bit dark. In his rage, Fulbert hired some henchmen to break into Abelard's study, and they castrated him. Yep. Once recovered in his humiliation, Abelard decided to enter the Abbey of Saint Denis and took his vows as a monk. At Abelard's insistence, Eloise also became a nun, despite having to leave her son behind. Despite their separation, their love continued through what is now their famous love letters. "Men call me chaste," she writes. "They do not know the hypocrite I am." Even during the celebration of Mass, she confesses lewd visions of the pleasures that she shared with Abelard take such a hold upon my unhappy soul that my thoughts are on their wantonness instead of on prayers. I should be groaning over the sins I've committed, but I can only sigh for what I've lost. This love story is by no means a perfect fairy tale. In fact, when we read it, there's a lot of questions to be had. Today, you think about a teacher-student relationship, kind of gross and irresponsible. Eloise, despite being well educated, wasn't a feminist heroine either. She gets married even though she doesn't really want to. She becomes a nun just because he told her to. There's so much intensity and sacrifice in their relationship that it all seems kind of foreign. But the tragedy of their relationship has a kind of grandeur to it that has captured the imagination and attention of everyone around the world. 600 years later, Josephine Bonaparte, the first wife of Napoleon I, was so moved by their story that she ordered the remains of Abelard and Eloise to be entombed together. To this day, lovers or lovelorn singles from all over the world visit the tomb to leave letters at the crypt in tribute to the couple or in hope of finding true love. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and in celebration of Valentine's
Okay, so this is what happens when two people who really should not be together are together, even though they express deep love for one another. The consequences do not work out. So I guess it's a lesson for us to be careful about our relationships. And I am no saint when it comes to that. I've been in a few bad ones myself. Sometimes her fault, sometimes my fault. That's as far as I'm going with confession today. Um, and the other part of this is that I think as the young lady says here, their tragedy has become sort of a legacy for us through their love letters. That's how we get to know their story. Um, and I remember even in class, when I was doing face-to-face classes, I would ask, how many of you, when you're in a relationship, do you write those long love letters? I mean, the old-fashioned kind that you handwrite on paper, you put it in an envelope with a stamp and mail it off. I had one young lady once tell me that she had quite a few in her possession. So obviously, she inspired young men to write to her. Or is it today you just text someone and say, hey, let's get together for a dinner or whatever? I'm not quite sure. When I was dating the last time in 2012, that tells you how old I am. I think we did a lot of emails back and forth in addition to seeing each other, but a lot of emails is where we wrote to each other, not the handwritten love letters. Anyway, this gives you a fair idea of what the early Middle Ages was like.
the love
And that's it for today's lecture. So let us go take a look at your assignment. Uh, I think some of you asked for an extension on your research paper, so I'm not going to take that out quite yet. So next week we're going to cover the late Middle Ages, and I'll have your standard lecture or office hour on Tuesday. So let's go here to modules. That's where I want to go. Yeah, oops. Early, high, Middle Ages. Okay, let's see what the assignment is. It is a discussion board. No one's tried it yet. Okay, I have two readings for you. Thomas Aquinas on Faith and Reason. Oh, I didn't. Oh, shucks. I didn't have the slide in there on a philosophical concept called Occam's razor. Um, it's one that essentially says when you have a problem, look for the simplest reason for it, which will provide a solution. It's more complex than that. And I thought, gosh, I'm sorry I didn't have the slide for that. It has a video. But if you're interested in that, you can look that up online. It was simply promoted by a name William of Ockham. And it's a unique concept, and I use it a lot because he says it can be used in philosophical concepts, but also for everyday use. And years ago, there was a period where I was laid off from a job, and it took a while before I found something else. And in between, money was very tight. But when I did find the job, I started spending money like there was no tomorrow. I guess it was my way to celebrate the job. But eventually, after months of that, I began to realize that I didn't have money lasting through the whole month. And so someone that I saw on television suggested the way to create a budget is first, for at least a month, document every penny that is spent during a month. And I did that. And after looking at what was spent every month or spent during that month, every penny, I realized how I could rearrange my money so that it would last. And so the 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 way Occam's razor came into play here, excuse me, is that when the money disappeared, I created all kinds of reasons why it disappeared. You know, rent was high, gasoline was high, electric was high, food was high. You know, what I realized was that by going through this budgeting process, I was the one who was spending all the money. It had nothing to do with rent or anything else. I had plenty for that, but the what do they call it? Liquid income or the disposable income. I wasn't hanging on to that. I was spending it all right away before the month was up. So by going through that process, which was the simple solution, the simple reason for my problem, instead of blaming all these other factors, I just had to look at myself. So this is a practical application of Occam's razor. So if that interests you, you can look this up online and do some research, okay? So it's a discussion board. Later on, I'll have the recording for you. Your options are discuss feudalism and pose whether or not it would work in the 21st century America and why or why not. Summarize Thomas Aquinas's reason and faith premise. How did it change intellectual thinking in his time? I think you can look it up in, it'll be in an essay of his, I think it's called the Summa Theologica. And then I have Occam's razor, explore Occam's razor in more detail and cite a few examples of how it can be used in real time in our 21st century lives. Or you can choose a topic of interest to you as long as it relates to our studied time period 1000 to 1300. And the rubric is always the same for discussion boards. It's 3 paragraphs for your post and then a paragraph to 2 other students in replies to earn the full 15 points. Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for today. I will see you next week when we'll cover the late Middle Ages, and I'll talk more about the Gothic architecture and what went on then in the Black Plague and all the rest of it. So I hope that you have a wonderful week and that your weekend is joyful. I know we're getting into the depths of spring here, and I hope that everything is going well for you. And I enjoy teaching this class, and I'm glad you are with it. And I will see you next Tuesday for office hour, Wednesday for your lecture. Okay, folks, have a good one.